Good afternoon. I'm Dean Hunter, and welcome to ResistTV. We are truly blessed today and truly honored to have with us an investigative reporting icon. Greg Palast has been called the most important investigative reporter of our time for his work for BBC Television and The Guardian. He's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Billionaire and Ballot Bandits, and Armed Madhouse. Greg is now reporting for Rolling Stone magazine, and he began his career as a Justice Department investigator, investigating racketeering and fraud. In September, he released a movie, a documentary, about how Donald Trump and his cronies would steal the 2016 election. It's called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, A Tale of Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, and we are joined live on the phone today by Greg Palast. Hello, Greg.
Glad to be with you, Dee.
Greg, really thank you for taking the time to be here. I'm a big, as you know, a big fan of your work. I guess it's important to let people know you've been doing this a long time. How long have you been involved in investigative reporting relating to voting rights?
Oh, wow. It actually began in the 2000 election. I was a reporter for both the Guardian newspaper out of London and BBC Television in London. And it was in London that I was watching the returns come back from the 2000 election between George Bush and Al Gore. And I was watching in London as we were getting reports that a whole lot of black people were saying, we can't vote here in Florida. You know, it was down to Florida. We didn't know who had won Florida. But then I kept seeing report after report saying that black people were finding that they couldn't vote. So I suddenly started thinking, and maybe my conspiracy part of my mind saying, could there possibly be some kind of computer program which was removing black people from voter roll? And sure enough, Dee, there was a computer program that removed black people from voter rolls. It was Catherine Harris, the Secretary of State of Florida, had removed almost 94,000 people from the voter rolls, overwhelmingly a list of African Americans, accusing them of being felons, ex-cons. And in Florida, it's one of the only states left in America that still removes people permanently from the voter rolls if they have a felony conviction. And so they said, oh, all these felons are voting. As it turns out, I, as an investigative reporter, if you know Greg Palast, you know my writings, I investigate, got myself the secret list of people they had removed, and it turns out that not one single person on that list was an illegal voter. Not one single person was a felon, ex-con voter who couldn't vote. And that's how they stole the election of 2000. Officially, George Bush won that election, D, by only 537 votes. Yet, but that wasn't counting the tens of thousands of African Americans illegally, wrongly removed from the voter rolls. And that's how so that was my first investigation of vote theft, and I thought that would be it. Wow, that would wake people up. It didn't, and almost every 4 years I've been on the trail of vote rustlers ever since.
And you know what's really sad about that 2000 election is, despite the fact that these tens of thousands of voters were added back to the rolls after your discovery, after the subsequent litigation, they were put back on the voter rolls, but it was too late. George Bush was president. Once again, a voter suppression tactic by the Republicans had been successful. And you're absolutely right. It's still going on. What is this? Explain to us, what is your recent project about?
Well, as you said, I was working with The Guardian and with BBC Television out of London, and so every 4 years I've had a new investigation of what's the latest way that they steal votes, and generally it's all about stealing votes from voters of color, because it's the most vulnerable community, and if you knock off a black person's vote or an Asian American or a Hispanic's vote, you don't get a lot of public screaming about that. You get away with it. So this year in 2016, I've done it every year. 2016, and actually began 2014. I asked a simple question: how are they going to do it this year in the 2016 election? And that investigation I did for first Al Jazeera, and now I'm a writer for Rolling Stone magazine. And so now back in 2014, I said, how are they going to steal 2016? And that was 2 years of investigation led me to a trick, an ugly racist trick called cross-check. And this trick called cross-check, by our estimate, has eliminated about 1.1 million voters from the voter rolls, and overwhelmingly voters of color.
It is absolutely an evil scheme and trick. We're very grateful to you for the attention that you've brought to this with your writing, as well as with the very entertaining and informative documentary you produce, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Billionaire and Ballot Bandits. Tell us exactly, Greg, how does cross-check work? How did this scheme come about, and how exactly does it work?
Well, as you know, Dee, Donald Trump said the election's rigged, and what we said is, well, of course it's rigged. He should know because it was his cronies who rigged it. And so here's what we discovered. If you listen to Trump's phrase, he's been saying it, by the way, for even before he was officially in the race. For almost 2 years, he's been saying that American elections are rigged. The second part of the statement is very important for people to listen to. He says it's rigged because people are voting many, many times. People are voting many times. That is, people are voting, he said people are registered and voting in 2 states. That is, so a guy named James Brown votes in Atlanta. Then he votes again in the same election in Michigan.
Right.
So they said that you have literally 3 million people, more than 3 million people voting twice.
3 to 5 million, right.
So, yeah, so what's happened is if you have 3 million people voting twice, they said, oh my God, I want to get a list of these ne'er-do-well voters. Who are these people who are voting twice? It's a felony crime, just so you understand. You vote twice. You go to jail, and it's a 5-year prison sentence. It's a federal crime, and most states also add on other years. And but how could millions of people get away with this? Because, hey, it's pretty easy to find double voters because you're registered in 2 states and you have a record of voting in 2 states. And with the computers today, we can absolutely find anyone who has voted twice. No question. It's very easy to find someone who's voted twice. But that's not what happened. What happened is millions of people do not vote twice in U.S. elections. Rather, this is an accusation which is used to cover over a system of removing people whom they accuse of voting twice. Accuse, that's very important, Dee. And so in my investigation for Rolling Stone, and as you'll see in my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, is that they accuse people of voting twice. And I just mentioned James Brown. This is a real example. There is a James Thomas Brown who indeed voted in Atlanta, Georgia, and a James Edward Brown who voted in Michigan and Detroit. But believe it or not, James Thomas Brown and James Edward Brown are not the same person. They just share a first name and a last name, and that got them on this purge list, this hit list, which targeted, and anyone targeted on the list, at least we know from the example of Virginia, about 12% of the people on the list. The list has 7 million names. Remember, they say the 7 million names represents 3.5 million people registered and potentially voting twice. No, Dee, they're not voting twice. These people are not, these are 2 different people in most cases. And we don't have any examples of people on that list who are voting twice. We do have a lot of people who we know lost their vote because they're on this list, like James Edward Brown, James Thomas Brown. The chance of the 7 million people on the list, we think maybe about 1 million people lost their votes, whose only crime was having a common name, like James Brown, like Edward Washington,
Right.
like Kim Lee, like David Ho, like Jorge Rodriguez. You're getting the idea here.
No,
Like Maria Hernandez, which means, look, when you're going after people with common names in America, you're going after voters of color.
So just to be sure, for the sake of context,
Yes.
basically this cross-check scheme was purported to be a quote-unquote list maintenance mechanism or scheme. In other words, it was presented as a way to clean up and check lists to prevent double voting, because we're going to put these lists together and see who's registered in 2 or more states. That's correct?
Right. We're going to see who's registered in 2 or more states, or
And who
when they first started,
who launched
who's
this?
voting in,
Who
they say who's voting in 2 or more states. The guy who put this system together is a right-wing Republican who is affiliated with white supremacist groups, and frighteningly enough, he's the Secretary of State of Kansas. Secretary of State means that he's also in charge of the voting. His name is Chris Kobach out of Kansas. And he was saying he was selling it on the air and on Fox TV and on all the radio shows, the right-wing radio shows, and to legislators, as this was a mechanism to hunt down double voters. And he said it over and over. We're going after people who are voting twice. So he created this hysteria about fraudulent voters.
Yeah, it's a cover-up.
They don't exist, but rather, and then when you ask him, well, there's no fraudulent voters. He says, oh, I'm actually not saying that. I'm saying it's people registered twice. But they're still removing people from the voter rolls, whether they, as he says, could potentially vote twice. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a potential criminal? Because you have a common name, you're a potential felon.
Chris, let me say that.
Are you if you're a voter of color, you're a criminal. So it's a scheme using this kind of what we call the hysteria factory to hunt down people with common names, which means voters of color statistically. If you hunt down these people with common names, you remove them from the voter rolls, they can't vote, and that's a good way to win elections.
Let me tell you, the fact that this is a brainchild of Kobach itself should raise all kind of alarms and flags with progressives and as well as non-Republican voters. This guy is a mastermind in voter suppression. He has written the player's guide on how to suppress votes, how to keep people from the polls. He's so extreme. He wants to require, and he actually tried to require every person to vote to produce a birth certificate. He's been overturned by the courts on numerous occasions. And now it looks like he's come up with a very sophisticated voter purge scheme that's really being masked as a list maintenance scheme, and it's really has achieved widespread acceptance. I am really glad you brought this to my attention, Greg, and I think in the efforts of full disclosure, people should know my organization, the Civil Rights Law Center, is committed to combating this voter suppression scheme, because it really is disenfranchising. It cost us the election, period.
Yes. And in fact, that's one thing people have to understand how big this is. You take a state like Michigan, and in fact, the update of my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, you follow me going into Michigan after the vote. Now, Donald Trump supposedly won Michigan by 10,700 votes. The truth is that they were using cross-check. I went to the Secretary of State's office, and they told me that they were very aggressive in removing people who were on the cross-check list. Now, we have an experience in Virginia where we know that they removed 12% of the voters from the cross-check list. So you don't remove everyone, because what you do is you send a postcard to someone, and if you send a postcard to someone or 2 postcards and they don't respond, then they get pulled off the list. Now, as you know, that makes it even more racially biased, because poorer people which and that in America means voters of color or students or others, tend to move around a lot more than suburbanites who have a home that they keep for 20 or 30 years. You might move in even within a building or to another building, or you move about in a city or congressional district, which doesn't mean that that you voted twice, but you don't get the postcard, or you're less likely to even bother. It looks like junk mail, these postcards, less likely to return the card. The result is that you lose your vote. Now, here's the thing. Are you losing your vote because you've illegally voted twice or are registered deliberately in 2 states?
Right.
So you're guilty of not returning a postcard.
And you shouldn't have been on the list.
In other words, you're not removed from the voter rolls because you're an illegal double voter. You're removed because you didn't return a postcard and you have a common name that puts you on this list.
Well, and Greg,
so again,
that's the issue. You shouldn't be on the list. The list itself is inherently evil because of the flaws in the list, because of the fact that you're mistakenly saying that individuals are registered in 2 states who are not. Then, sending them the postcard, they don't respond, then they're placed on this inactive list. That in itself is harmful because once a voter is placed on that inactive list, politicians and others don't campaign to them. So,
let me explain. Yeah, let me explain what an inactive list for those people who don't know the rules here. What happened is after the 2000 race, in which George Bush won by removing black voters from the voter rolls, believe it or not, they used that as an excuse to change the law. They said, "Oh, we don't want another Florida." And in fact, what they did was they changed the law to make sure that they'd have many Floridas, many more cases in which voters of color would be removed from the voter rolls. They created a law. They passed a law under George Bush called the Help America Vote Act. Now, when George Bush says he's going to help you vote, you better look out. So what happened in this law, they said 2 things. Number one, they said that if you are that each Secretary of State, like little Catherine Harris's, can actually purge the rolls of voters. In fact, they're required to purge the rolls of voters through a system they call it list maintenance. That is, get rid of voters who aren't voting. Well, in the 30 Republican states, they're using this system called cross-check to remove voters that they say are registered in another state. Well, yeah, a lot of people, there are 2 things. One, we know that a lot of this list is phony. It's not even people registered in 2 states. Like I say, 2 million, and this is important, 2 million of the names on the list are not matched by middle name. James Edward Brown, James Thomas, Maria Cristina Hernandez, and Maria Inez Hernandez is supposed to be the same person. These are not made up. These are real examples from the list. But also there's some people who are on the list because they did register they were registered in 2 states. Why were they registered? We had a Mr. Naylor out of Atlanta. He was shown to have be registered in 2 states, this guy ready to vote twice illegally. Well, one was in New Orleans where he had lived a dozen years earlier. He'd moved to Atlanta, and like most people, he didn't tell
change his registration.
In Louisiana, he'd moved. And so as a result,
he's on the list.
He was going to lose his vote in Atlanta because he hadn't requested the removal of his name from the voter rolls of Louisiana. He wasn't going to be voting twice.
And Greg, and it's literally millions of examples like this. I want to get to quickly the trailer of the film before we run out of time. It's funny how the time just flies when we're talking about this kind of stuff. Let's run the trailer to The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. See, can we get that up on the air?
My name's Greg Palast. I'm an investigative reporter. And every 4 years, I become a crime reporter. The crime, election theft. Why are these such secret lists? This is a list I'm not supposed to have, and you're not supposed to see. It's a list of 7,200,000 voters. If your name's on this secret list, your ballot can get canceled legally. Why? Because you've been accused of voting twice.
This voting system is out of control. You have people, in my opinion, that are voting many, many times.
voting many times, Donald? You claim millions of Americans commit voter fraud. That's how they plan to steal this election. The trick is called cross-check, and it's ethnically cleansing the voter rolls of 29 states. Here's our file on the Wizard of Cross-Check, Chris Kobach. He's the top election official in Kansas, Republican superstar.
Mr. Kobach? Hi, you're the guy behind the cross-check list.
So how would cross-check steal an election? Well, check out the names on the list. Hernandez, Wong, and nearly 250,000 Jacksons. In other words, voters of color.
This is voter suppression, pure and simple.
Want to know who's behind this ugly business? A small circle of men. Paul Singer, the Vulture. The Vulture made his biggest killing ever by preying on Detroit and chewing on this, the corpse of the auto industry when it collapsed in 2009. John Paulson, known as JP, the foreclosure king, and the Brothers Koch. David and Charles Koch fund the Heritage Foundation, which promotes the mass purge of voter rolls. And the Heritage Foundation's latest crusade? Kansas Interstate Cross-Check.
We got like a 2-week notice. They just said, well, we're closing the doors.
The pain runs so deep when you have to wake up every day wondering, is they gonna try to take my house away? I mean, what's next?
If they're gonna take away your job and take away your home, they'd better take away your vote.
That's The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits by Greg Palast. I got to tell you, I've seen the documentary. It is extremely powerful. It is extremely moving. Thank you again for doing this work, Greg. This cross-check thing is very evil. Let me say one classic example. In the state of North Carolina, prior to using cross-check, their lit maintenance purge was some 40,000 voters. The year after they adopted cross-check, their list purge went to 180,000 voters. That's how dramatic and deadly this thing is, and we got to get rid of it. Speaking to that, Greg Palast, what can we do to stop this?
One, we have to know about it. We have to spread the word. So I have a not-for-profit foundation, so without making this a commercial, I'm going to say, see the movie. How painful can that be? As you can attest, Dee, it's very moving. It's also very funny. It's a Hollywood movie with Rosario Dawson and Willie Nelson and Ice-T in it. It's a documentary, but it has a lot of real Hollywood movie fun elements. Not too painful. So go to gregpalast.com, get the information about The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, or it's on Amazon. That's a very easy way to get this horrific information about how Donald Trump shoplifted this election using racial purge tactics. Now the question is, after you're informed, or you can read the book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, or go to gregpalast.com and get more information. And also, Dee, since, as you mentioned, that you're going to be taking up the fight as an attorney through your Civil Rights Law Center, I'm thrilled to be allied with the Civil Rights Law Center out of Washington. So once we get informed about cross-check and other methods, other kind of newfangled Jim Crow systems of attacking the voter rolls and attacking your vote, then we have multiple things to do. We have to spread the word. Once we spread the word, now we're responsible for taking action. Action means joining in with your group, D, the Civil Rights Law Center, with the NAACP's National Voter Project, and others to take political action, legislative action, and really political action. For example, I know we are going to have Reverend Barber out of North Carolina. We have a lot of activists in Ohio, Michigan, and elsewhere. So if you go to my site or to D. Hunter's site, to your site, you're going to get some information about what groups you can ally with,
Yes.
take action with, to get rid of this poisonous, racist method
And
of bending elections.
And I'm going to, Greg, you're absolutely right. I'm 100% committed to fighting this for you. The Civil Rights Law Center, the organization in which I'm the executive director of, you can reach that at civilrightslawcenter.org and also gregpalast.com. We have a major campaign that we're launching in Virginia to attack cross-check this year, and we're going to take this thing on state by state. Once again, let me thank you, Greg Palast, for the work you're doing in this battle against cross-check and voter suppression. And we want to thank you for bringing this to our attention and for being on the air on Resist TV today.
I really appreciate the opportunity, Dee.
We're definitely going to keep following this closely and look forward to having you back. Thank you very much, Greg.